Why is everyone trying to gaslight me into pretending that he's hot or charismatic? He is neither of those things, and I don't know why we're trying to force it. Every time the new year approaches, I always make the same type of videos that look back on the previous year. These include the best books that I read in the year, the worst books that I read in the year, and now a general overview / wrap up of the year in general. This is where I look back on all the books I read and go through my reading stats, see how many books I read, what was my average rating, comb through my Goodreads, which I always never consistently update throughout the year, and then I end up having to sprint through everything at the end of the year to catch up. And you know what? This time I had to do it for Luigi because my man is not even able to look at his Goodreads Wrapped. We might never know what his Goodreads stats would have been, but I'll try to be consistent with mine. I'll also look at my rating spreadsheet that I keep up throughout the year, and that one has a much more detailed data in terms of a more accurate reflection of my average rating and how much money I saved because I exclusively read library books or borrow books. I also have a breakdown of my popular genres and just a bunch of other statistical things. I'll also look back at the movies that I watched throughout the year because I do track them on Letterboxd, and in general I'll just give like a life update because this is what New Year's is for, to look back on the previous year and then figure out what we want to do moving forward. So whatever your goal may be, I hope that we get to work on it together, and we may get some help with our friends at Skillshare, which is the sponsor of today's video. I feel like my biggest challenge has been being more consistent with writing, but I think because of classes like Skillshare, it becomes easier to be more inspired. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, freelance, productivity, and more. They can help you take your career, skills, hobbies, passions, or side hustles to the next level. And I especially want 2025 to be a year where I make more time for creativity, because the more that you exercise and build your craft, the better that you get at it. And a class that stood out to me for my goal this year is Creative Writing Bootcamp. This is especially relevant because the class is designed to answer the question that I am dealing right now, which is what should I write about next? So if you're interested in her class or any of the other creative classes that are out there, the first 500 people who click on the link in my description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So thank you again for sponsoring, and now let's dive into my reading stats. First, we are gonna look at my year in books on Goodreads. I do wanna note that some of the stuff that you see on Goodreads is not gonna be accurate, because if you're someone who is familiar with Goodreads, you should know that the website is janky as hell, which is why I have a separate reading spreadsheet that we'll look at later that has more accurate information. But for now, allegedly, Goodreads says I have read 24,448 pages. We'll see if that's actually true when we look at the spreadsheet. But what is true is that I read 79 books in total for the year. That's actually 10 more books I read in the previous year. People like to have reading goals for reading a certain number of books per year. I personally don't do that. I just read whatever I feel like reading, and then I get this number at the end of the year. The shortest book that I read this year was Blood Orange at 66 pages. This checks out because Blood Orange is a poetry collection, and obviously those tend to be very short. I was reading a lot of Palestinian authors in 2024, and I gravitated a lot towards poetry by them specifically. This author is a trans Muslim displaced indigenous Palestinian, and a lot of their poetry revolved around yearning for home and belonging. The longest book that I read this year was Hunting Adeline, and this is where Goodreads messed up with the number of pages because for some reason it says 18 pages. I think it took the actual number of pages from the audiobook, which I had listened to, and not the actual page number from like the actual paperback book. I had to listen to the audiobook because when you read a book like Hunting Adeline, it can be very difficult to read the writing with your eyeballs. Let's see what the actual page number for Hunting Adeline is. The paperback is 624 pages. The ebook is 565 pages. Boy, does it feel like it. And we're talking about Hunting Adeline, not Haunting, by the way, because Haunting was the first book and Hunting is the sequel, and the sequel was somehow even longer than the first book was. The average book length that I read in 2024 is 309 pages. The most shelved book that I have read is Funny Story by Emily Henry, with over 1 million people also putting it on their Goodreads shelves. This makes sense because Emily Henry is a very popular author. She's been kind of hit or miss for me with certain books. I really loved People Leave Me on Vacation. I didn't like her other book, Beach Read. I did like Book Lovers, but I didn't end up finishing Happy Place. And now with Funny Story, I did end up finishing it and I liked it, but I feel like it's hard to beat the #1 Emily Henry book that I really really enjoyed, which was People We Meet on Vacation. So I'm glad that out of all the books, that is the first one that's gonna get a film adaptation. The book that is the least shelved on Goodreads is The Islands of Elsewhere. Less than 1,500 people had put this on their Goodreads shelf. This makes sense because I don't recall anybody else really talking about this book, and I had only picked it up because this is the same author as Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, which is a book series that I really enjoyed, and so I decided to check out the author's other books, and this is a middle grade one that wasn't really for me because I'm obviously not in the audience demographic, but it's interesting to see the leap that the author has made with her writing from middle grade to the kind of prose that she writes for Emily Wilde, because that whole book is written as academic journal entries. So even though this one wasn't for me, we love the range that this author has. The highest rated book on Goodreads that I read is The Message, which is a nonfiction book by Ta-Nehisi Coates. It's a series of essay collections that he wrote to reflect on his trips to Colombia and South Carolina, and then later even to Palestine. And that was the main reason why I wanted to pick up this book, because there was actually an interview that I had seen of him where the interviewer was really grilling him about Palestine and Israel, and the way that he answered those very pointed questions was just so classy and a lot better than I would have done. And that's why it made me very curious to pick up this book and read his thoughts about it. I just think he's super intelligent and he has such a great way with words. So according to my Goodreads stats, it says my first review of the year is not that bad, but that is not accurate. I don't know why there is a mix-up here, but that's actually the second book that I read in the year. The first book that I had read in 2024 was actually Starling House. I thought I was going to drop this book because the first few pages, it was very hard for me to get into the writing style. This is something that I've noticed about this author. She tends to have a very casual, almost juvenile writing style that is reflective of the character. Even though this is like considered an adult book, because of the voice and tone that the main character has, it feels so much like young adult. And that was really hard for me to wrap my mind around because I'm not really a fan of characters that have a juvenile sense of voice. But I decided to keep on reading it, and I actually dedicated a plane ride that I was taking in the beginning of the year to read through the book. And I think that really helped me get more used to the writing and be more immersed into the world. And I ended up really liking it a lot. Even though, again, like the style wasn't my cup of tea, I do think the writing was actually pretty good. Out of the other books that I have read from the author, I think this is her strongest work so far. After that, you get an overview of all the books I read in the year, but I'm gonna scroll down to the very last one, which is Dangerous Fictions. That is the last book that I had ended off in the year. This one is a nonfiction book that had been released back in late October, and the author really interrogates how dangerous fiction is and why is it that time and time again it keeps on provoking moral panic, and why do we assign such moral attributes to it to the point of even censoring fiction altogether. But I thought what was really interesting and unexpected about the book was how she continued to talk about other aspects of the ways that we put a lot of moral and emotional and intellectual weight onto books, and how she tied it into the ways that the book community often uses books as virtue signaling or expects books to be a teacher of empathy. So much of what she wrote put into words about how I felt about the book community and the ways that we approach books, especially the part she dedicated to whether fiction can truly teach empathy and how that is actually a responsibility that is unfairly placed upon authors of color. And also the discussion of the ways that we expect art to be useful, or for books to only be valuable if it makes you intelligent, like it's supposed to improve your life in some way. And she pokes holes in that kind of thinking. These parts of the book actually ended up being so interesting to me that I ended up taking notes. And I also, in the new year of 2025, started reading another book that was referenced in this one because I wanted to read more about this kind of topic. And I might actually make a video in the future about this on the topic of whether reading actually teaches empathy and what are the implications of having those expectations in the first place, because I think it's interesting. So if you think it is too, then maybe stay tuned for the video that I will make about it. So that wraps up my Goodreads stats. Now let's get into the meaty stuff, which is my giant Google spreadsheets where I have logged the books I've read, the money that I've saved from borrowing books exclusively, my yearly stats, my monthly stats, and the books that I dropped because I wanted to track how many books that I just decided not to finish. This is a reading spreadsheet that I took from Hardback Hoarder. They made a really in-depth template that I have repurposed for whatever I felt was more relevant to me. I'm just gonna do like a quick scroll through all of the 79 books that I had read in the year. You might also notice that I've left the ratings column blank, and that's because I decided not to make my ratings public anymore. You might have noticed this from the videos that I've made throughout the year too, where I talk about the books and what I think about them, but I don't mention the rating that I give for them. In actuality, I am rating the books, but that's only privately in this rating spreadsheet. The gist of it is that the more that I read every single year and have rated and reviewed books every single year, the more that I realize that my ratings and reviews are deeply personal. And I feel like when you become a more public figure, people seem to conflate your reviews as official reviews and ratings as official ratings. And I just don't like the association that people have with that because I've never claimed to be an objective reviewer. The reason why I started this channel and shared my thoughts about the books I was reading and have updated on Goodreads and have this reading spreadsheet is because I just wanted to track the books I'm reading. That's it. And when it comes to ratings, I feel like those things are completely arbitrary and subjective. And so I feel like by making my ratings private, that's gonna help me be more true to myself. And it's also gonna avoid the public being misunderstanding or misconstruing my words as some official statement. And also, if you have seen any of the book drama videos that I have posted, you would know that authors get really up their ass about Goodreads. I think it's absolutely wild that authors will make anonymous accounts in order to mess with the ratings on Goodreads for their books or for other books of authors that they don't like, or try to argue with reviewers in the comment section. That's just taking way too much time and energy, but my priorities are not the same. Like, I'm just here to just write my silly little opinions and move on. And so I still plan on using Goodreads and this reading spreadsheet to keep track of the books I'm reading. I still plan on talking openly about the books I'm reading and what I think about them. But I just feel like adding ratings makes people go a little cuckoo because some people take this shit way too seriously. And so if it's for the peace of mind for everybody to not like twist their panties about it, then I don't have to leave a rating. But I can show you my average rating in the yearly stats in a bit. If we look at the money saved tab, you'll see that all of the books that I get are either from the library, or I received the books from publishers, or I just borrowed the books from other people. So I took a look at how much these books cost on a popular site like Amazon, and based on the cost that Amazon was giving, the amount that I saved is $1,221.24. Not too bad. However, this is sadly not even close to how much I pay in rent in New York. And now let's look at my yearly stats. You'll notice that some of these columns and boxes are blank, and that's because in the original template, I didn't want to keep track of certain things that were not relevant to me. But at the same time, if I tried to move anything, it would break the spreadsheet. And because I'm not very good at Google spreadsheets, I just figured I would leave it as it is. So you're gonna see some weird spots around. So basically, in total, I've read 12,878 pages. I've listened to 300 hours of audiobook. And among the 79 books I read, 12 of them were buddy reads, meaning that I read them with a book club or I read them with my girlfriend or a friend. The average days it took for me to finish a book was 10 days. In terms of reading goals, I don't actually make a reading goal for myself, but for the sake of filling out the template and just to be immature, I wrote 69. And based on that, I completed 104% of my goal. And there's even like a chart that is a monthly breakdown of the number of books I read per month. So the highest number of books I read was in December with 12 books, which makes sense because I think I read like 3 or 4 graphic novels with Victoria, so that just added more to my average. The lowest number of books I read was in September with 4 books. I was also traveling in September as well because I was in Paris, and so maybe with the traveling that also slowed down my reading. For the formatted books, I listened to 33 audiobooks and I read 39 ebooks, and for physical books, I only read 7. All of my reading is when I am commuting, and every single day when I am going to work or going to run errands or whatever, I always have so much crap that I have in my bag, in my backpack. To add a book on top of that is just so much extra weight. Like for my workplace, I literally had to carry 2 laptops with me. Do you know how bad of a hunchback I have now? So if I were to add a book on top of that, it's over for my spine. My scoliosis will be like, bitch, you better not. So it's just easier for me to consume books on my phone. In terms of audience, I read 67 adult books, 3 middle grade books, and 9 young adult books. For a series, I read 3 companion novels, 10 books that were part of a series, and 66 standalone books. This also makes sense because I tend to prefer standalones, and it's really hard for me to get into a series. I think the only series that I am actually invested in right now is Emily Wilde. Like I could read so many books from that series and it wouldn't even matter. But other than that, if there's a story, I want you to wrap it up by the end of the book. For the star ratings, this is when you get to the juicy part of how much I'm actually rating these books that I'm not revealing to the public. And according to this chart, my average rating is 3.176. Not very different from the previous times I've rated books publicly. Most of the time when I just feel meh about a book, I'm gonna rate it 3 stars, which is why I rated 30 books 3 stars. There were 4 books that I rated 5 stars, 2 books that I rated 4.5, 23 books that I rated 4 stars, 4 books that I rated 3.5 stars, 13 books that I rated 2 stars, and 3 books that I rated 1 star. I feel like it's rare for me to rate 1 star unless I feel like it truly is trash or is like offensive to the world just from like its existence. The majority of the publication years I read were from 2024 because I read 37 books from the year in total. The oldest book that I read, which for some reason is not pictured in this chart, maybe because it would be such a tiny little fraction, is Giovanni's Room because that was published in 1956. For the genres that I read, it looks like the highest number is nonfiction books because I read 15 nonfiction books, 13 contemporary books, 13 fantasy books, 9 romance books, 8 graphic novels, 7 horror books, and then the 1s and 2s and 3s are anthologies, historical, poetry, sci-fi, thriller. The subgenres I read really varied here, but it looks like the biggest subgenre was literary at 15 books, and then the second was fantasy and contemporary at 10 books. Below that would be romance at 8 books. For author stats, I read primarily cis and trans women authors. There were 65 authors that identified as she, her. I'm pretty sure this will continue to be the trend because I just tend to gravitate towards fiction written by women. For the author status, I read 34 debut authors. Then there were 23 authors that I've read before, and then there were 22 authors that were new to me. And then here's an overview of my monthly stats. But again, the month that really was the banger for me in terms of books was December because I read 12. And then lastly, for the books I dropped, I am not going to share the titles and authors for this because I feel like this information should be private because I worry that if people saw the books that I dropped, they will misconstrue it into thinking that maybe I didn't like the book or that I thought it was bad or whatever. But there's tons of reasons why I might have dropped a book. Sometimes I'm just not in the right headspace for it. Or sometimes I am reading it, but then I get another library book that is available to me and I would rather read that one. There's all kinds of reasons and I just don't want to explain myself for every single book. But in total, even though I read 79 books, I actually dropped dropped 42 books. That is like over half of the total books I read. And that really goes to show how open I am to dropping books. And I think that this should be embraced more often. All right, I'm filming on a new day because as you can see from the last clip, I was losing a lot of sunlight. This is the problem with filming during winter. Let's move on to the last portion of my video, which is looking at the movies that I had watched in the year and telling you what my best movies were and worst movies. So Letterboxd decided to do their own Wrapped, and it says here that I had watched 77 films in total. That's 3 less than the total number of books that I had read this year. And in total, I watched 134 hours of those movies. Most watched actor was Dakota Johnson, which I guess isn't a surprise because Elias and I did react to 2 movies from the 50 Shades franchise. I had also reacted to Madam Web, and then in December, Victoria and I ended up watching Persuasion. All of these movies are known for being quite bad, but I will say I enjoyed Persuasion, but I can understand why people didn't like it because I'm sure that it is very different from the books, and Victoria and I had the benefit of watching it without having read the book. So we kind of just took the movie for what it was, and I thought Dakota was fine for a period piece. I know some people complain that it's very obvious that she knows what an iPhone is, but I don't know, I feel like she has a classic beauty to her that can pull it off. I think it's just easy to be distracted by remembering all the other terrible films that she's been in. But really what stood out to me about Persuasion was the main guy. He was truly the hidden gem in that movie. He was emoting the yearning throughout the film. And you know, in the beginning, I didn't even really care about him because I felt like he wasn't hot like you would expect from, you know, a romance movie, but he really won me over with how well he acted his ass off with constantly yearning after the main character. Every time he fucking looked at her, he just looked so fucking sad and heartbroken, and I was really into that. My most watched director is this guy that I have never seen before, but I guess he's considered most watched because I saw 2 movies that happened to have been directed by him. One of them was 101 Dalmatians. This was a movie that I hadn't seen since childhood, and I decided to rewatch it randomly because I was high and I just wanted to see cute puppies. But I didn't know that apparently he also directed Our Little Secret, which was one of the many bad Christmas rom-coms that Netflix is putting out. I don't know why people were charmed by this movie, but I felt like they had no chemistry, and it was just yet another movie where when I see people praise it, I wonder to myself, how have our standards become so low? The next section is my highly rated 2024 films, and this is where I'm gonna talk about basically the top 3 movies that I had watched. Letterboxd is actually inaccurate though, because I would not put The Substance as one of my top 3. I would put one of the advanced screenings that I had seen as my top 3, but let's dive into it. First is The Wild Robot. I saw this in theaters and I cried my eyes out. I truly loved seeing this robot become a mother to a cute little baby duck, and just seeing the way that they loved each other, I was like, goddamn, robots are truly mother. And she would do anything to protect her baby twink duck, who was also voiced by Kit Connor. I feel like all the actors really immersed themselves into the characters that they were, because I had no idea that the robot was voiced by Lupita Nyong'o. This truly showed the range that she has, because she was an amazing robot. Kit Connor, I totally forgot that he was British. I didn't know Pedro Pascal played the fox because he was a funny little asshole in the movie. And there were just so many times where I was crying my eyes out watching it. The other film that I'm gonna put in my top 3 is I Saw the TV Glow. This is an A24 film that is technically considered horror, but don't come in with expectations of this being like a traditional horror. There's no jump scares or like gore or like other stuff that you would expect from a horror. Like a lot of the quote unquote horror aspects is more abstract. It's more of like the character's emotional journey and what the protagonist has to deal with, like mentally and emotionally. That is like the horror part. The story is about this teenager and their best friend who are both obsessed with this TV show. And at some point, their best friend disappears, and later the best friend comes back and tells the main character that they are actually the characters in the TV show. So this is where it gets kind of trippy, but I love the trippiness of it. But the whole story is really a metaphor about being transgender. And this is not a spoiler spoiler because literally the first scene that you see in the movie shows the main character as a kid, and the kid goes underneath like this parachute, and the parachute is literally the colors of a trans flag. I think the cinematography might have been like the most gorgeous visuals that I have seen in a movie in a very, very long time, because the way that the movie plays with lighting and colors was just so beautiful in every single frame. And it also shows the main character's journey with accepting being transgender or being more closeted about it. It's funny recalling my experience watching the movie because I had watched it with my friend who is trans. He said that it felt like his heart was exploding in his chest. Meanwhile, I'm just like, wow, the colors are amazing. And I was just going along with the journey of it. So I guess the lesson is, if you watch this movie, I think you should watch it high, because I feel like you're gonna appreciate the visuals of it even more. And also the movie is quite slow. Like, I tried rewatching it with Elias and he couldn't really get into the movie because it was very slow, nothing was making sense, and so he ended up not finishing it, which is very typical of cisgender scum like him. If you can get into the zone and fucking lock in like I did, you would really enjoy it. It is not for everyone, but I would say if you are like a stoner like me, or if you are one of those queer people that grew up on Tumblr, you would probably be into this movie as well. The other film that's gonna be in the top 3 for me was this early screening that I went to. So obviously I can't say the title or what it is about, but I was curious checking out this movie because the director for it is actually someone who I have previously joked on my channel before, because they have kind of gotten in hot water before because they have done things that perpetuated racism, specifically against the Asian community. So obviously I was making fun of this person, and now that I see that this person is directing a movie, I was curious about checking it out. Now, what I did not expect was for the movie to make me literally bawl my eyes out at least 7 different times. Literally from beginning of the movie to the very end, all the way up to the last scene, and then it cuts to the credits. I was a mess. Like, I was actively holding back from sobbing, and I am upset that I can't even talk about what the movie was about, who was in the movie, why I cried so hard. It really fucking hit. And so now I'm like, you know what, director whose name that I cannot say, maybe you can get away with a little bit of racism because you gagged me so badly. And yet there is still no trailer, no promotional images, nothing about the movie. I have no idea when it's gonna be released, and so I have to keep this secret in my heart forever until it finally comes out. So those are my top 3 movies, and I know Letterboxd doesn't have like a section for worst movies, which I feel like is no fun. So I'm gonna tell you my worst movies anyway. These do not include the reactions that I have done on my channel. I'm gonna go with new movies that I have not talked about before. There were a lot of bad movies that I watched throughout the year, okay? But I feel like these were particularly heinous and offensive to me. So first is Gerald's Game. This was basically like a horror movie about this dude that has a sex game, but then it went wrong, and then the woman is handcuffed to a bed. It's like trapped there, and then she starts to see like these really crazy visions. There was just a lot of gore to the point where like my friends and I that randomly played this on Netflix, my friends got nauseous watching it. I don't really get nauseous from gore, so I was just watching it going like, what is going on? I couldn't tell you a single thing about this movie. It was very pointless and weird, and honestly watching it would be a waste of time. Another waste of time was Anyone But You. I don't understand how people can enjoy this movie. This is the one starring Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell, who I don't understand why Hollywood is trying to make him a thing. Why is everyone trying to gaslight me into pretending that he's hot or charismatic? He is neither of those things, and I don't know why we're trying to force it. It felt like aliens had watched a bunch of rom-coms and then just wrote this script. And I say emphasis on aliens because real people do not act this way, and just because these actors are conventionally attractive doesn't mean that they're engaging to watch. watch or have chemistry at all. The third worst movie I watched was Miller's Girl, which has Jenna Ortega, and I like her as an actress, but I don't know why the hell she picked up this movie. It was basically about her seducing a teacher. You can just tell from the trailer how bad it is and how problematic it's gonna be, but I'll tell you what, this movie was something worse than being problematic. It was corny and pretentious. I can watch problematic shit, but I draw the line when you try to be corny as fuck when you're justifying this weird ass relationship. Now let's wrap up the rest of my Letterboxd stats. So the most watched week of 2024 for me is 6 films during the week of February 12th to 18, which makes sense because I was with Victoria at the time, so we watched a lot of movies when we were together. And the most watched day of 2024 is Saturday. Also makes sense because it's the weekend. First watch of the year was The Boy and the Heron, which I watched in theaters on January 6th. Unpopular opinion, the movie did not hit for me. I know it won an Oscar. I know it's been very critically acclaimed. Sadly, despite me being high, I still was not enjoying the movie. But I do feel like Miyazaki films tend to be a miss for me. And then the last watch for me on December 27 was Wicked. The reason why it took me so long to watch it was because I wasn't gonna see Victoria in person until the Christmas break. We have the same opinions about the movie because once the credits rolled, we looked at each other like, it was a good movie, but unfortunately, I think all the TikToks that we had seen of people crying watching the movie, raving about how it wasn't just a movie, it was an experience, all of that really set our expectations way too high. As a result, we watched it and we were underwhelmed by a couple of the aspects of the movie. And also, just to give some context, we have both seen Wicked on Broadway, so we're familiar with the story and the songs. We came into this ready to rate this 5 out of 5 stars. It's really more of like a 4-star for us because I thought the first half was great. I thought the singing for both Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo were fantastic. I really liked the set design. I liked how immersive it felt. The biggest grievance that I have was the pacing. It was just so all over the place. Like I could really understand how they ended up having to split into 2 movies because there were so many scenes that went way longer than it should have been. I can really tell when the director wants you to feel a certain way emotionally because he will stretch that shit out forever. I think the biggest example of this was Defying Gravity at the very end. That's like the most iconic song of the musical. Cynthia did amazing with singing it. However, why the fuck are we constantly interrupting this amazing song with action and talking? That's disrupting the momentum and the flow of the song. I felt like that reduced the emotional impact of the song, which makes me sad because I had seen so many people cry from that last scene of the movie and I was so prepared to do that. I'm gonna put a link in my description of a storyboard that an animator put together for Defying Gravity. I felt like it's much tighter and better than the actual movie because it showed the characters doing the actions while they were singing. So that way, nothing is being disrupted. You are still going with the momentum of the song. And even the actions that the characters are doing in the storyboard were much more dynamic. And I will still be seated for part 2, but I definitely think the fact that it had to be split into 2 parts because the director couldn't condense the story into 1 movie shows the lack of brevity on his part, which is a skill that I feel like many creative people don't really have. Anyway, that's just my rant. Let's finish up the Letterboxd Wrapped. For my diary milestone, the 50th movie was 101 Dalmatians. It was a cute movie. I enjoyed it. Again, I literally just randomly turned it on because I was high and I wanted to watch puppies. And you know what? There needs to be more dog movies that have cute little puppies like that aren't sad. We need fun dog movies like 101 Dalmatians. And then the most watched theme for my movies are laugh out loud relationship entanglements, and the most watched nano genre is hilarious, chemistry, and predictable. That pretty much wraps up the media that I consumed throughout the year. I thought I would end this video by reflecting on my life throughout 2024 as well, but honestly, I should just be glad that I survived in the first place. But that is what is great about movies and books. They can give you escapism. I'll see you next time. Bye.